You know what I keep seeing? We talked a lot throughout season one about onboarding clarity, training consistency, and expectations. One thing that kept surfacing under all those conversations was this. Many businesses genuinely believe they have an onboarding problem, but what they actually have is a consistency problem. The reason this gets missed so often is because orientation usually feels successful. The employee showed up, they completed the paperwork, they watched all the videos, somebody gave them the grand tour, the manager is relieved, and the employee is excited. Everybody's all smiles. Success. Then, about a week or two into the relationship, something starts quietly shifting in the background. The employee starts asking more questions. They're making silly mistakes. The manager starts repeating instructions. The employee begins hesitating before doing simple tasks. Different people are giving them different answers to the same questions. Things start feeling a little bit like a relay race where nobody practiced passing the baton. Orientation handed the employee off to the real workflow, and that's where inconsistency showed up. At first, the signs are subtle, then the confusion starts to spread, and leadership starts saying things like, they just don't seem to be catching on. They don't seem to be the right fit for our operation. They need too much handholding. But most of the time, none of these is the real problem. The real problem is that onboarding suddenly stopped at orientation. Orientation ended, and everybody assumed, okay, they've got it from here. Orientation usually has a structured plan. The real workflow doesn't. Once the employee enters the real workflow, that structure disappears. That is when operational drift starts creeping in. And operational drift behaves a lot like a computer that has too many windows open in the background. At first, everything still technically works, but as the system gets bogged down, the machine starts running hotter, the fan starts sounding like a small airplane preparing for takeoff, everything slows down, simple tasks start taking longer than they should, and now the whole machine is working harder just to maintain basic performance. That is exactly what operational drift does, and this leads to inconsistency inside businesses. A lot of businesses do a decent job introducing people to the company, but what they do not do well is reinforcing operational consistency once the employee enters the real environment. But the problem is that the real environment is messy. Managers are teaching the same process in completely different ways, so employees begin picking up habits from whoever trained them last. Shortcuts start showing up, processes become verbal instead of documented, and before long, people are learning the operation based on proximity instead of consistency. And while leadership believes training is continuing, what's actually happening is interpretation has quietly taken over. And once interpretation becomes the system, inconsistency spreads fast, especially inside small businesses where speed often replaces structure. Because small businesses often depend very heavily on tribal knowledge. See, one person knows how something is supposed to be done. Another person was taught a completely different version. And a third person says, well, technically, that's not how we do it anymore. And now the new employee is trying to build confidence inside a three-dimensional operational reality where every direction is pointing them somewhere else. That's exhausting. And leaders often do not realize how much hesitation confusion creates. Because confusion shows up dressed as slowing down, second guessing, repeatedly asking the same questions, avoiding independent decisions, waiting for approval, fear of making mistakes. Then leadership responds by labeling the employee as lacking confidence. But how is someone supposed to develop confidence surrounded by inconsistency? That is why mature operations do not rely on successful orientation being one day. They reinforce operational clarity over time. This is also where businesses unintentionally create hidden dependency. When systems are unclear, employees become dependent on other people instead of the process. Now, every answer requires an interruption. Every task requires confirmation. Every situation requires escalation. Managers slowly turn into human GPS systems because nobody is confidently moving towards independence. Everybody is stopping every few minutes and asking, am I still going the right way? That level of dependency exhausts operations over time. And the really interesting part, a lot of leaders think this is normal. They think, well, employees are always going to have questions. And of course they are. But there is a difference between healthy learning questions and operational dependency. Because healthy learning questions will decrease over time as the employee matures. But operational dependency will stay permanent. So they're always going to be doing it. Two completely different situations. And this is why the first sign of onboarding breakdown is not usually a metric, it is an exhausted manager. Managers start saying things like, I keep answering the same thing. Nobody follows the process consistently. Every shift is doing it differently, and people keep forgetting the steps. What they're really describing is an operation that keeps reintroducing confusion, not an employee failure. And this is where mature operations think differently. Mature operations understand that employees do not become operationally stable just because they heard the information one time. People need reinforcement. They need consistency. They need systems that reduce interpretation, especially in fast moving environments. Think about restaurants and hospitality and operational teams dealing with interruptions all day long. Those environments move fast, which means confusion compounds fast too. So if one manager says, do it this way, and another manager says, nah, we actually changed that, then the employee immediately stops trusting the system. Now they start relying on personalities or which manager they like more instead of operational structure. And once that happens, consistency becomes fragile. This is also why some businesses experience onboarding success only when specific managers are working. That, my friends, is a huge operational clue. If consistency disappears when one strong employee or manager is absent, the system is not fully holding itself together. Instead, the person is carrying the process. And what makes this especially dangerous is that the operation still looks functional from the outside. Customers are still being served, phones are still being answered, the doors are still open. Meanwhile, internally, everybody is compensating just to keep things moving. So eventually, burnout starts showing up around the exact same places where clarity was missing. Training starts taking more time. Correction becomes constant. Supervision gets heavier. Turnover risks start climbing. Manager frustration gets harder to hide. And what's fascinating is that many businesses try to solve this by doing what? You guessed it, adding more orientation content, more paperwork, more videos, more information. But friends, information alone does not create operational consistency. Reinforcement does, because operational inconsistency is usually not a knowledge problem. It's a systems reinforcement problem. And mature operations understand something really important. Employees should not have to remember the business entirely from memory. The system should support consistency. And when the system supports consistency, it means expectations stay stable, processes stay visible, communication stays aligned, managers reinforce the same standards, employees are no longer forced to decode operational reality on their own. Because when employees spend energy decoding the workplace, they have less energy available for performance. That is where hesitation comes from. That is where inconsistent execution comes from. That is when confidence quietly disappears. And honestly, this is why some businesses constantly feel like they're starting over with employees because the operational environment keeps resetting itself. The employee never fully stabilizes because the operation keeps accidentally reintroducing confusion. And this is why onboarding should never be viewed as a single event. Onboarding fosters operational consistency over time, and that is what mature leadership understands. At its core, onboarding is really about reducing uncertainty. And when uncertainty decreases, confidence improves, execution improves, accountability improves, independence improves. People perform better when operational reality stays stable. Now, that does not mean that businesses need giant, complicated systems. Sometimes when small businesses hear conversations like this one, they immediately imagine massive corporate infrastructure. That's not what I'm talking about. Small businesses can create incredible operational consistency, but they usually have to do it intentionally. So they start by tightening communication, standardizing expectations, reducing interpretation. They reinforce behaviors consistently and stop assuming that the employees should just know. That phrase alone causes so many problems. They should just know. No. If multiple people are confused in the same area, the operation is communicating something inconsistently. That is an operational signal. Mature leaders pay attention to those signals instead of immediately jumping to blame. They start asking, where is confusion entering? Where does reinforcement disappear? Where are employees becoming dependent instead of developing independence? That perspective changes everything because onboarding then will stop being, did we complete orientation? And it will start becoming, can employees operate consistently without constant correction? That is a much deeper operational question. And honestly, that is why operational maturity matters, not because businesses need perfection, but because businesses need stability. People relax when expectations become clear. Managers stop translating everything, and employees stop second guessing themselves. That is what better systems actually do. They create stability, they reduce friction, they help people work with more confidence and less confusion. And ultimately, better systems build better workplaces.